Good Wednesday, everybody. We continue in our study and reading of the Gospel of John. And of course, our focus has been on the last day of Jesus' life before his death, burial, and resurrection occurs. We're down to our last three lessons. Our plan today is to get through chapter 18 and complete that, and then divide the rest of chapter 19 in 2 weeks of study. So thanks for being with me. I really do appreciate it. It's encouraging to me when I hear about those of you who are following along in my class and also in the offering of Carrie in Romans, which has been very, very interesting, and I know many of you have enjoyed it. When Jesus had been betrayed finally by Judas, and you remember about what preceded the betrayal was that last day, that last night that Jesus spent with the disciples. And so he betrays Jesus for those 60 pieces of silver. And then the armies, if you will, the cohort as they're called, they take Jesus and he is now officially arrested. During that time, you should remember what happens when Peter, the one I might have mentioned to you, that he had determined he would never turn his back on Jesus. You recall that. Of course, Jesus told him he may not know as much about his willpower as he thinks. But, I mean, he seems to get off with a pretty good start here when he does what he does, thinking this is really protecting Jesus. In chapter 18, verse 10, it says, Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink? Now, to what extent Peter understands what's actually going on here, that's hard for us to really know. But things are happening rather quickly right now. And I think as Peter gives some consideration to what's going on, I think he might wonder a lot about what Jesus is saying. He thinks he's displaying to Jesus exactly what he promised, and that is to stick with him and to protect him and never turn his back on him. And then Jesus says to him, look, don't be worrying about this kind of thing right now, because you shouldn't be having a sword out. You should recognize that what's happening is just exactly what is intended by God to happen. And that is this cup, what he is about to experience over the next day. And so after that event, we find that Jesus is presented to some Jewish leaders. It says the Roman cohort in verse 12, and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. So the Romans are helping out here, and certainly the high priest and other individuals related to the priesthood are involved in this arrest. But they take them now to the one who is called Annas, and then ultimately to Caiaphas. Now this gets a little bit confusing. I don't know that we understand it completely, but Annas had been the high priest for a number of years, and the Romans got involved in selecting, and I'm sure the high priests were consulted, various individuals amongst the Pharisees and Sadducees. When someone gets removed, then someone's going to take that person's place. And so the way it's presented to us is that Annas had family. Caiaphas was his son-in-law. He had some sons, apparently. And there was times when they would sort of trade around the position of high priest. And so now that's Caiaphas. But you can understand why they may have gone to Annas first, because probably many people think of him as being the high priest anyway, because of his seniority and the fact that these are his children. It says, now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people. So he's one who has planted the seed that if the people decide they want someone to die, that that can be arranged. And knowing that to be true about how they felt about Jesus as relates to that truth, you would understand that this sounds pretty good to them because they've already decided that they want Jesus dead. They want him to be killed, not thinking that they are, again, just going along with the plan of God, which is going to lead to his execution and his death on a cross, lifted up as it is presented to us in 3 or 4 places. And through that, he's going to be doing the work of God. And they're not interrupting anything. And so here he is before those individuals. And of course, we note again Simon Peter. Peter's right there. But things are about to change. His view of himself and his strength and his courage may be something that's going to be a cause for some thought on his part. It says Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. That priest, that person, that disciple who's known, is generally considered to be John, and he makes a couple of references to himself without naming his name, and so it is understood that that's who he was. And the fact that he is with Jesus at this time, and Peter is there close by, I'm sure the other disciples aren't too far away, would be because John was aware of the people that Jesus knew, and I think John knew some of the people with whom he was going to be dealing with when he was arrested. So it shouldn't be a shock that he's there. It says, so in verse 16, after we read that he's entered into the court of the high priest. So remember now, these are individuals who certainly have clout, but they are not the law that is going to be necessary in order for Jesus to be executed. That could only be done, we're going to read just a little bit later, by the permission of the Romans. But as it says there, Peter was standing at the door outside. And so the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. So through the influence of John, we think Peter was allowed to go into the meeting. And then there was a slave girl who was at the door. And it says, the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, were you not also one of the man's disciples, are you? And what is the brave man who was willing to slash off the ear of a servant of the high priest? He's willing to do that, and he denies that he knew Jesus. He denies that he was his disciple. Now, I don't know what starts going through Peter's head. Maybe, as I said, things are going by so quickly now, he doesn't really have time to think about what's happening. But as time went on, he began to realize what Jesus had said to him, that he was going to deny him. And he would know and be reminded of that when a rooster crowed. So, there's nothing much said about that other than it says, now the slaves and the officers were standing there having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold and they were warming themselves, and Peter was there with them, standing and warming himself. So he's just, I suppose, trying to be a person who's not being noticed. He doesn't want to be noticed, but he knows what's going on, or he wants to know what's actually happening. So the high priest then begins to question Jesus. Remember now, this is denial number 1 by Peter. Jesus, he asks a question, the question Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Now, notice how Jesus responds to them. He says, I have spoken openly to the world. In other words, this was nothing that I was desiring to hide from anyone. I wasn't sneaking around. It was right out there in the open. And he knows that they know that. In fact, that's what's got them so upset. And that is that he is the one who's been teaching these things, and they know what he's been teaching, and they have decided that they've got the goods on him based on the fact that he refers to himself as the Son of God. That would then be something in violations, that would be heresy. Um, and so he would deserve death in terms of actually being a false prophet. That's how they would look at him. And so they would feel comfortable when stoning him, but they didn't really have the legal right to do that, at least the way it's presented to us. So he says, I've been out there speaking in the synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. And I spoke nothing in secret. So why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. Now, if you've seen shows where the police are interviewing someone that they think is a suspicious character, or maybe he has actually, in their knowledge, has committed some sort of crime. And the person who is the one who is accused starts asking questions. They usually don't like that. In fact, you'll hear them say, no, look, you answer the questions. We're here to ask the questions. And that's exactly the way the priests were looking at it. We don't have to answer you in any way. So he says, Jesus says, go out and ask somebody. Find out what's going on. They'll know. Well, that didn't go over too well. And so if you'll notice, at the end of verse 21, it says, why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. They know what I said. So notice how someone responds to this. So when he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, is that the way you answer the high priest? And Jesus answered him and said, if I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong, but if rightly, why do you strike me? So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now, I don't know if he feels like he's really done as much as he can, Annas. But nevertheless, he feels probably they've got enough on this guy to send him on to Caiaphas. And so it's at this point in time where Peter is a part of the story again. It was prophesied he was going to be a part of the story at the end. Certainly in the fact that he's going to betray Jesus. We don't know exactly when that was going to happen. But it's mentioned there in John chapter 13 as something that's going to be happening. And I think the implication, obviously, is that it's going to happen soon. So it says, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium. This was like government house, might be a way of describing it. And it was early. And when they say it was early, all the writers and scholars tell us that really meant early, because they actually started their day doing business around sunup or around 6 a.m. And most of them wanted to be finished by around 11 or 12 o'clock. So when it says they were there early, that's what it means. And they themselves did not enter into the praetorium so that they would not be defiled by, but might eat the Passover. Now, they didn't want to go in, and I'm guessing this was understood by Pilate and the rest of the Romans, who were the foreign rulers, the occupiers, so to speak, at this time. But what happens is it's about time for Passover, and if these guys go in there where the Gentiles live and where they do business, then they're going to become unclean, and they don't want to. So they don't want to go in. So no one came out and demanded that, you either come in or go away. What happens is Pilate, who was there, because it is said that this was the place where Pilate lived when he was in Jerusalem, and he liked to be there around the time of holidays. But most of the time he lived in a place built by Herod up in Caesarea. But he's here at this time, and of course he's going to have a very significant role. And within the providence of God, he is highly, highly involved in what's happening. So he says to them, well, what accusation do you bring against this man? And they answered and said to him, if this man were not an evildoer. I want you to think about the tone that they have. They slapped Jesus because he said, well, look, you ought to really know why I'm here, and I shouldn't have to be explaining it to you. Notice what they do to Pilate. They said, if this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. Sounds kind of sassy, doesn't it? I mean, if this guy wasn't wicked, if he wasn't a sinner, we wouldn't be here. So come on, Mr. Pilate, think for a minute. So Pilate responds, well, you take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. And the Jews said to him, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. Now, I suspect the way Pilate looks at this is that when they come with this individual, and I don't know how much he knew about him at this point, but he's really not in a position here to be that interested in it. At least that's the way he seems to be behaving at this point. But he does find out why the Jewish leaders felt it so important to get him in front of the governor, and that was they can't execute him without the approval of Pilate and the Roman government. And so Pilate's a little bit more aware now of what's going on, and so he says, they say we're not permitted to put anyone to death to fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Now, what most people think there is that if the Jewish leaders were going to kill Jesus, they would have stoned him. But it's prophesied that he is going to die as a matter of execution. And then, of course, we can see other places where it is certainly implied that Gentiles are going to be involved in this. But it was really this death on the cross, and the cross becoming so symbolic. The fact that the providence of God seems to be involved here. And in order to see that Jesus is executed by the Romans and is executed on a cross and crucified, that would have to be done by their taking some sort of control over this. And so Jesus was not to be stoned. He was to be executed on the cross by the Romans. And so I read, to fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. So we've looked at that. Verse 33, therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? So he's obviously heard about that being at least one of the things that they're hoping they're going to be able to get Jesus on. And that is that he's trying to upset the government and he wants to become king. And that's something I think that would be a threat to them, or and to Pilate specifically. He doesn't want any kind of an uprising that's going to come as a result of this guy claiming to be a king and some sort of coup coming out of that. He doesn't want any part of that. So he hears that, and so he decides, okay, get Jesus back in here, and I'm going to talk to him, and I'm going to ask him some questions. And so in verse 34, this is how Jesus answers. Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me? So, what gives here, Pilate? Did you come to some sort of conclusion like this, or did you just hear about it from someone else? And so his response is not particularly sincere, but nevertheless, what Pilate says is, well, I'm not a Jew, am I? In other words, why should I be concerned with anything that's really related to the Jewish law and what's bothering the high priest? If you're about to try to overthrow the government, well, then I'm concerned. So since I'm not a Jew, I'm a Roman, that's going to be my concern. So yes, I'm interested in that. So he says, your own nation and chief priest delivered you to me. So what have you done? And what he, I guess, is wanting to know is, okay, are you worthy of some awful punishment? And I believe he's thinking, if it's just because you've upset these people with some of the things you've been teaching, and if he can conclude that you're not really a threat to my kingdom, well, I don't even know why I'm sitting here listening to you. So Jesus answers him and says, this is on the issue of, are you a king? He says, my kingdom is not of this world. This is verse 36. And if my kingdom were of the world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. In a nutshell, what he's saying is, I am of no threat to you. I am not trying to destroy the Roman government. My kingdom is in a more spiritual realm. It is not one that is built upon power in the world. It is something that I think what he would be saying to Pilate is, I don't think you really understand this now. I'm not a physical threat to you. I don't want to take over as a king, a physical king, because my kingdom is not of this world. So, Pilate wants to know just a little bit more about this. And so he says, so you're a king. In other words, are you saying that you're a king? They already said I'm a king, but I'm not a king like you're a king. Or I'm not a governor like you're a governor. And so the question then really becomes clear that he should understand that physically, I'm not a threat to you, Pilate. All right, so now that's what Pilate has said, because Jesus says, you say correctly that I'm a king, and for this I've been born. And for this I've come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. So he says, well, you say correctly that I am a king. I mean, that's why I've come into the world. That's what Jesus was prophesied to be. He was prophesied to be the one who would come from the family of David, and he was going to sit on David's throne. But it was not going to be a kingdom or a kingship like anything that you would see in the world, where it's all about conquering, it's all about taking land and extending one's rule over these people by power. It's nothing like that. And Jesus wants Pilate to know that. But when Jesus says something that causes a Pilate to be almost somewhat distracted, I mean, he gets centered on this thing that Jesus said. Jesus says, I've come into the world to testify to the truth. Because Jesus has said he is the truth. Jesus has said, I am the Son of God. And so when being the kind of person that Jesus had been, he is just simply laying this on the line. I mean, the reaction by Pilate is, oh, come on, what's the truth? I mean, I'm just kind of reading into his tone a little bit, but as I had mentioned in a lesson I preached Sunday, and that is that generally speaking, in a society that's built upon relativism, the idea of saying you've come to represent the truth, most people who are out there are going to say, well, who are you? Who are you to say what's true? You have your truth and I have my truth. So you understand that how it goes. That's nothing new. I think that's the same attitude that Pilate has. What's truth? And so to what extent that affects him and how he reacts to what it is that Jesus may or may not have meant by that, notice now what he says to the people. And when he had said this, he went out again, goes back outside to the Jews who didn't want to come inside. And Jesus, as a prisoner, really didn't have any choice. You have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you the King of the Jews? Now, I don't know if he's being totally sarcastic here, or maybe he just doesn't even understand what's actually going on here. maybe he believes that Jesus is very popular, and maybe these guys just want to some way celebrate his popularity. So he says at Passover, there's a custom that if you wish to release someone, uh, then you can do that. And he says, "Oh, do you want to release the King of the Jews? I mean, if he's popular enough." And again, I don't think Pilate has great interest in this thing so far. Um, but he's learning about Jesus, and he knows how at least the ones that have been talking to him seem to have a great interest in something happening to him. And so he says, "Well, what do you want? I could release him. Is that what you'd like? This one who's the King of the Jews?" Now, again, he may be being totally facetious. I don't really know. But the reaction that they take when they hear that, how about releasing him? I can do that. Then that's when they cry out again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Barabbas' name means robber. And so it says now in the New American Standard, now Barabbas was a robber. He was considered, what you read in other writings, that he was some sort of an insurrectionist. And, whether he's an insurrectionist trying to bring down the government or whether he was just a robber, that I guess really doesn't matter a whole lot. But this guy's clearly a criminal. And they said, "No, we don't want you to release Jesus. For sure, we don't want you to do that. But go ahead, release this one named Barabbas." So you can see what's going on in the hearts of the people and how much they want to see Jesus dead. But again, what they don't understand, that this is the cup that Jesus was drinking. This is exactly, as he's following everything that's going along here, he knows it's going to lead to bringing total glory to God, and that's going to be through his death. So again, Jesus is not trying to win any arguments. In no way is he trying to get his freedom, because that's not why he came, and that's not where he is at that point in time. He's ready now to step into the role that has been his for an eternity, and that is to be the Savior of the world. And he's ready to do that. And so if those guys want Barabbas to be let loose, well then it's really not a problem for Jesus, because Jesus' whole existence at this point in time is leading to this moment where he was arrested, or he's faced by the religious leaders, and he's faced by the political leaders, and out of that is coming a sentence of death. That's where this is headed, and that is exactly where Jesus wants it to go. But let's just finish a couple of minutes here in the beginning of chapter 19. "So Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him," or had him whipped. I guess if he's trying to please the people and he doesn't want to upset them, maybe if he beats him up a little bit, maybe that'll make them happy. And so they started making fun of him, and this is now all leading to his being placed upon a cross to die for the world, to save the world. And so important, again, is understanding who Jesus is. Jesus did do a lot of teaching in the synagogue, and I'm sure he impressed a lot of people, but he didn't come just to be a good teacher. He came to provide for people who by their own behavior have separated themselves from God. And he is the only way back. That's why we tell people salvation is only in Jesus, because this is God's plan. And whatever he knows and whatever he understands, obviously, about what he may experience as a human being, I mean, he's got to know that this is going to be extremely trying and painful. But that's not what matters to Jesus right now. He's risen above that. And even though Peter would like to find a way to save Jesus. Sure seemed like it was in the case when he went after the servant. Jesus' end was about to now be accomplished. And so next week we'll get into chapter 19, and we'll talk now about what happens when Jesus is actually there being executed. So thanks again for being with me today, and I hope you're reading along. This is really, for me, it's intended to be that kind of a study. I want us to be able to move through the text, get the gist of it. Yes, we're going to leave out some of the minute details, and I don't say that to put those things down. I'm just saying I want you to get the picture. What I always hope is going to happen as a result of my studies and my reading with you is it's going to stimulate your desire to learn more. So if you want to know maybe some things about how the Roman government worked then, you could research that yourself. There's a lot of things you could do to help you to understand a little bit more about what's going on there. So you have a good day today. I'll get this posted, and you should be able to be looking at this. If you are looking at it, it's because I did get it uploaded. And hopefully you will get some good out of it and to see what's happening here. Because remember why it's written, so that people would believe. That's what John said. And Jesus did a lot of things to show that he was truly who he was. The way he taught, the miracles that he did, but this is when it's all going to come to a head, where people are going to know the resurrected Christ truly is the Savior of the world. Thanks for being with me. I appreciate it very much.